Welcome. I'm Bob Duff. This is my co-host, Kevin Allen, the Hall of Fame hockey writer from USA Today. And this is the bi-weekly hockeydebates.com sports betting dime hockey betting podcast. And we're talking today about betting on the NHL and different ways the league has been impacted that can affect your betting choices. And we're going to start out by talking about, obviously, the biggest story in hockey this week, the departure of Don Cherry from Coach's Corner. And one of the things you can bet on at Sports Betting Dime is, or you can bet on it at sports books and find out info on it at Sports Betting Dime, is who's going to replace Don Cherry on Coach's Corner, or how are they going to replace Coach's Corner. And right now, the odds-on favorite at plus 125 is Brian Burke. And Kevin, you know Brian quite well. Do you think that's a natural fit?
Yeah, it sure is. When you put this out as one of the things we're going to discuss, and I hadn't even looked at the betting odds before then, I thought, well, Brian Burke, if you were trying to get as close as you can to a Don Cherry-like person, I think Brian Burke would be it, just in terms of he can be a controversial figure. Now, he is obviously far more polished than Don Cherry. He is a Harvard-trained lawyer, and he's also more current. Don Cherry, as we talked off air, he hadn't been in the league since the 1970s. Brian Burke is only, recently has been a president of the Calgary Flames, and of course won a cup when he was with the Anaheim Ducks, and has been with the Vancouver Canucks and the Hartford Whalers, served as the discipline guru in the NHL for a while. This guy has kind of run the gamut of jobs, and it would be a different program. But I think if you were looking for a sort of a bombastic personality and a guy who would stir it up a little bit and not afraid to offer his opinion, and I think Brian Burke would be your guy. Now, the only thing I would say is there's only one Don Cherry, and I think if I wouldn't be surprised if they decide that we have to go to a completely different format. Elliot Friedman, if you're going to put him in that post, you're not doing a reprise of the Coach's Corner, because that's not. Elliot Friedman is a very professional journalist. So, and another one I'd throw out there too. Couldn't you just have Ron MacLean, there and sort of turn it into a Canadian hockey 60 Minutes where he brings somebody in every week? And I don't want to say they'd be on the hot seat, but it could be for the games a hot button topic every week, and Ron MacLean, being a professional journalist, would ask some tough questions. I mean, there's so many different ways they could do it, and I think it's fun that you can bet on who it is, but it seems to me that it's better than even odds that they are going to just change the format.
Yeah, another thought I had, I watch a show on the BBC called Have I Got News for You, and it's a current event show with a comedic twist to it. And their host blew up very similar to Cherry and got fired. And that was probably a decade ago now. And what they did was go to a weekly guest host and had a different person come in and host the show with the same panel that's there every week. And the format works quite well because you get a different voice and a different perspective every week. And I think that would be a solution here. Why not just go to kind of like you say, have Ron MacLean as the host with a different guest from hockey each week? It could be a media member. It could be someone involved in the front office of an NHL team. Somebody that could talk about issues in the game and really keep it current.
Yeah, I mean, that might work. I like the idea of that. That it still has an edge. And I'm sure that will be the thinking as well. They want to do something that's not just normal between period banter. We have enough of that with these little brief interviews with players that we see in some of the in the team broadcast. You want something to add. The one thing about Don Cherry that I brought up to a lot of people when I've appeared on radio shows talking about him is that, what I always enjoyed as a member of the media, when you were in Toronto, in particular, but also in other places in Canada, in between periods, all the writers would get out of their press box seats and gather around the television when it was time for Coach's Corner, because it was must-see TV. You needed to go and watch that. And I think that should be the goal. The goal should be, it doesn't have to be Coach's Corner, but they need to have a provocative show, because, in Canada, this hockey is serious business. We're not just fooling around. And that's what the Don Cherry show was. They tackled a lot of tougher issues, and they tackled, in a lot of cases, they were not politically correct, and ultimately that's what cost Don Cherry his job. But I think whatever they do, they need to keep it, relevant and edgy, and find a way to treat hockey very seriously in that time frame. And if they keep Ron MacLean there, he's controversial in his own right. Like he can be a tough interviewer. We've all seen him do that. He has opinions as well that sometimes run against the grain. So I think he can stay, and maybe your format works. Maybe it's Brian Burke. Maybe they do it a different way. I mean, you could have Elliot Friedman, and then it just would become like a newsier program. But with Ron MacLean as one of the hosts, it certainly could have an edge even if Elliot Friedman was there.
And one time I interviewed Jim Rome, and he explained his show as, that's not me. That's a character that I play. And I think that's, as you say, Elliot Friedman would be very professional and very informative, but it would also be fairly milquetoast. You wouldn't see a lot of craziness. And, you talk about the writers watching Coach's Corner. Well, Canadian Press had a reporter assigned to watch Coach's Corner every week and write about what Cherry said, just in case this is the week that he went nuclear. So, you talk about that's, you must see TV, as they used to say at NBC. That's why people, I don't know necessarily people watch Cherry to be informed as much as, is this the week when it's finally going to happen? Because, Don always said himself that one week he was going to go too far and that would be the end of it. And that, in fact, is what happened. So I think you're right. I think you need someone in there who's very knowledgeable on the game, but you also need a character, someone that people want to see. Like, people wanted to see Cherry because you just never knew what was going to happen. And I think, rightly or wrongly, that's how TV works. It's personality that sells as much as it is knowledge. And I think that's something that's got to be weighed. And that's why I think Burke's the front runner in the odds, because he can provide that kind of atmosphere.
Well, and the other thing that shouldn't be forgotten is that you don't have to have rants to have to be edgy. If it was Elliot Friedman, I mean, he could come in and the issues themselves could end up be the edginess to it if they tackled some stuff that is difficult to kind of to get your arms around. But would I watch if Brian Burke was on with Ron MacLean between periods? Absolutely, I would. Because one thing, the other thing is different is Don Cherry was not wired into the league. Brian Burke can pick up the phone and call anybody in the National Hockey League. He's friends with a lot of the veteran general managers. He certainly knows Gary Bettman. He worked for him. He knows Bill Daly. He can get inside information, and I think that could bring a different dimension than Don Cherry had.
I think this is an opportunity, too, for them to kind of change the conversation, and I think Brian Burke could do that as well as being a character and someone you want to see what he had to say, because Brian's obviously, through his son, has been involved in issues with the Hockey for Everyone, and I think that instead of having a guy like Cherry on there who made fun of Europeans, who made mocked French Canadians, and would say players talk in an effeminate voice when he talked about players being soft, why not have a guy on there who can address the issues in an informed way and in an educational way, and maybe try to make hockey really be hockey for everyone? Because I think that's the number one argument I've heard from the anti-Cherry crowd in the past week, is that he shunned new people from the game instead of trying to be inclusive and get new people to the game. And if you talk from to anybody at Hockey Canada. Their numbers have stagnated. Their youth hockey numbers are not growing. And part of the problem is there are a lot of new Canadians now who are from non-hockey backgrounds, and getting them into hockey is a challenge.
Yeah, and Brian Burke would bring a very complex political platform to the show if he shows up. Because on one hand, he would be like Don Cherry in his support for law enforcement and the military, but obviously there's a compassion to Brian Burke's politics that is missing from Cherry's, and that is that Brian has been supportive of Gay Pride Parade. He's marched in it because of his son. He has his politics are very complex, and I think that would sort of add to the show as well, because of that. But the more we talk about it, the more he just seems like the logical choice if you're going to go to a show that's going to be at least similar in scope to the Don Cherry show.
Speaking of complex, tonight the Detroit Red Wings are in Los Angeles to play. Now, from a betting standpoint, this game is a conundrum because in the NHL so far this season, the best teams to bet against and cash a winning wager have been the Red Wings and the Kings. So when they play each other, how do you bet that game?
Well, I'd bet against the Red Wings normally because they're the road team trying to play in a different time zone. And, I saw them earlier in the year, and I thought they were by far the worst team in the league. And I had watched L.A., and they were close, but I thought the Red Wings were worse. But saying all that, in the last 3 games, in particular, the Red Wings have looked very good with big wins over the Boston Bruins and the win against Anaheim, the come-from-behind win, was pretty dramatic. And they just look like a more confident team. And it's amazing what a couple of wins will do. But, they suddenly don't look like the worst team in the league now. So we'll have to see. The one thing I would say, and we talked off air about this, was the fact that I think the development of Hronek on defense has really helped the Red Wings. He looked lost as a defensive player last season. He looked like he had a big shot, and he looked like a player that could help a power play, but maybe at best he was going to be a power play specialist. Well, now he looks like an all-around defenseman, and he's learned how to defend. And, now that we're entering the quarter pole mark of this season, suddenly, the fact he's playing more than 20 minutes a game sort of makes the Red Wings a better player. And, of course, they had that the trio of good young players. And, they made a trade, and sometimes a trade like for Fabre, bring him over from the Blues, that can inject a little enthusiasm, and it has. He's scored a couple of goals and had an assist and given that second line. So right now, I would say, based on my history of knowing the game, I would say bet against the Red Wings on the road in a different time zone. But the way they're playing now, I do like the way the Red Wings are playing.
Well, if you are thinking about putting some money on this game, you're going to want to wait till after the morning skates a little later today with the time difference, because so far today the Red Wings have called up 2 defensemen, Jonathan Ericsson and Joe Hicketts. So there's something up with their defense. We don't know what it is yet, but depending on who's out injured, that could be an impact of significance on the outcome of this game as well.
Yeah, or it could be a trade. There's been a lot of discussion about the Red Wings wanting to move a couple or at least one of their veteran defensemen. So, I guess anything is possible at this point. But if you're a Red Wing fan, I don't think you can get too excited yet about this Red Wings team. I think they're playing better, and maybe they weren't as bad as they looked early on. But there's still a long way to go, and I think Steve Yzerman is being honest when he says that he thinks it's going to be a while and you're going to need some patience with them.
Let's look at the flip side now. Let's talk about the Kings. I mean, I thought last year bringing Ilya Kovalchuk back was a terrible idea. You're another older, slow guy to go with an old, slow team, and it just seems, it's obviously blown up as a disaster for them. And now he's kind of sitting in limbo, and they're trying to figure out what to do. What's going on with this LA team? Are they still a disaster area, or is there hope for something happening soon with them?
Well, I think they are a disaster because they're trying to pull off the trickiest event in the game, which is they're trying to rebuild on the fly with a couple of $10 million players tucked under their roster. So you're not trading Drew Doughty or Anze Kopitar, and so you can't strip it down to the chassis like we've seen in other rebuilds, like in Buffalo and Toronto, and that makes it difficult. So. With the Kovalchuk situation, I think they're going to be able to move him. Like people are so down on Kovalchuk, but he is not the kind of guy you want on a rebuilding team. He is an inconsistent player, talented to be sure, but doesn't always bring it every game. But could he fit as a secondary scorer in Boston? Well, of course he could. Could he fit on Washington as a secondary scorer? Well, yeah, he could, and he could be a helpful player. So there are places that Kovalchuk can go where I think they'd be happy to have him because they have the kind of team that can overcome his deficiencies. But he can't be a help. I saw him in the Olympic Games in 2018, and he was up against top competition, and he looked very much like a top player. So we're only a year and change removed from that. I think he can still play, but you have to accept the fact that he's not going to be a perfect hockey player. So I get why LA, is moving on without him, is telling him that anyway. In fact, I never understood why they got him in the first place. But I don't think this is the end of the road for him. I would think there would be some intrigue from at least a few teams about the possibility of bringing him in and maybe making him a second line or a third line scorer and spotting him on the power play.
Moving on from betting disasters to friend in hockey right now is also probably the hottest team in hockey, the New York Islanders. They're 13-4 in their last 17 just on the ice. But from a betting standpoint, they're also the best team to bet on in that span. They've gone 10-7 against the spread. What do you see with this Islanders team? And last year, everyone kind of expected them to be horrible after John Tavares left, and yet they made the playoffs and made quite an impressive run last year, and are showing so far this year that it wasn't a fluke, and this team is for real.
Well, what I see with this team is Barry Trotz behind the bench and Lou Lamoriello in the GM chair. And, I didn't have faith in this team because I didn't like the letting Robin Leonard go away. I thought he played very well for them last season. But they brought in Varlamov, and I thought, well, they might have trouble making the playoffs. Varlamov had to prove to me that he could do it. And now I look at their team and their numbers for their goaltenders are roughly the same. And I realize now that, Trotz's defensive system is effective enough that it really doesn't matter to a certain extent, who's in net. And Varlamov has played fine, and Grice is fine, but, they have a strong offense up front. I like that group, Anders Lee and Barzal, Nelson. I mean, they've got some players that can, put the puck in the net. And they have found a way through a good defensive scheme to keep the score down from the other end. And I think they're a team built to be successful in the playoffs. And Trotz really knows how to do that. And I think Lamoriello is going to make a bold move because that's his history. So I'm very bullish on this team. I think they're for real. And if you got a couple of shilling to put on that team, and if you don't want to throw all your money on one of the regular favorites like the Bruins or the Capitals or the Colorado Avalanche, I think that this is it'd probably be a good value bet with the Islanders. I think they're for real.
And they're kind of the exception to the rule in the analytics world, because if you look at the Islanders' possession numbers and their zone time numbers, they're not great. But if you give them the eye test and watch them, yeah, the puck's in their end a lot, but it always seems to be along the boards or at the point. It's never in the high danger scoring areas. So if they were a football team, people would call them a bend but don't break defense. But it seems like the Trotz system is, we'll give you the zone, but you're not getting near the net.
Yeah, no, that's right. And Trotz converted the Washington Capitals into a Stanley Cup champion through a defensive scheme that's very similar to the one you discussed. And I think he's done a masterful job there. And I think we have to respect the fact that, we want to believe that Toronto Maple Leafs is a Stanley Cup contending team. And I think this Islanders team, the way it's playing, is a better team right now than the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Another thing I wanted to get into today is total wagering. And for those new to betting, total is simply the total goal in the game by both teams. The sports book set a number, like say the Islanders Leafs game last night, say the number was 7-5, 7.5 goals. The Islanders and Leafs ended up 5-4 Islanders, so it would have been a 9, so that would have been over the total. So when you bet on the total, you either bet the game's going to go over the established total or it's going to go under. And surprisingly, not surprisingly, Washington's the best over team in the NHL right now. They're 14-5, meaning they've gone over the set total 14 out of 19 games. Meanwhile, Florida is right there at 12-6, another team that can score a lot of goals, so that's not surprising. But the one that kind of jumped off the page at me, because we don't tend to think of them as a scoring team, is Nashville. They're also 12-6, meaning they've gone over 12 out of 18 games. Is this a sign that, we talked a little bit about Nashville last week being kind of a Stanley Cup sleeper, and suddenly they're, a team that we thought were defense is putting the puck in the net. Does this bode well for their chances of going long?
Well, it does. I mean, Peter Laviolette has been known as an offensive coach. There aren't many coaches in the NHL that have that reputation, but he does. He wants to play an up-tempo, move the puck, and attack type style. Excuse me. But in the past, they haven't really had the team to do that. And what we've seen this year is Matt Duchene has made a major difference, because I think he has given them two strong lines. Before, they were a one-line team, and that second line was disastrous. And now they have two centers, he and Ryan Johansson, who can distribute the puck and can make things happen. And it's made that whole team better. And having Duchene there has somehow managed to get the defense re-engaged with the offense. And, they're among the top scoring teams in the league. And you would not have guessed that. I mean, this is a team that was last, I think, in power play last year. And their power play has improved this year. I mean, to me, power play is, there's a lot of luck involved in that. You really need puck luck, and just because your team is bad on the power play, I've had coaches, when you ask them, they say, well, if I knew, I'd fix it. Well, I understand that, because I think a lot of the time it is just a lot of luck. It's just pucks going in off people in front, and screens and so forth. So I think we shouldn't have been so damning of the team last year when their power play was so bad, because they had the right people there. They just didn't have any luck, and this year they are having luck on the power play, and I think Matt Duchene has helped. But here's another thought too. PK Subban, when he was there, because of the way he played, he's kind of split up the the offensive opportunities, and now that he's gone, a guy like Roman Josi is the guy now. Ryan Ellis is the guy again. So they're not splitting up all that as well. Now they've kind of got the two offensive guys, and everybody kind of knows their role. So that probably plays in as well. But I think what you see is what you get with the Nashville Predators.
Now, on the other side of the coin, the team that is the best under bet in the NHL this year, meaning they're going to go below the goal totals, is a surprise to me. It's the Dallas Stars, and you'd think with a team with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, and now adding Joe Pavelski, you would think they would be a good overbet. And yet they're 14-5, far and away the best underbet in the NHL. No one's even close to their numbers.
Well, they're lucky if they can get 2 goals a game, and I agree with you. Like, it's mind-boggling that a Sagan-led team would have so much trouble scoring, but they do. They don't. Their secondary scoring isn't very strong. I don't think Jamie Benn has been the player that he was, 3 years ago. Pavelski is not at the same pace he was a year ago. So they got to work. The Dallas Stars strategy now. And Montgomery has done a good job of trying to convert them into a more defensive team. But their strategy right now really is Ben Bishop. Ben Bishop is the guy, and he needs to go out and play well. And when he does, they got a chance to win because they played defense well enough to keep that score down. And, they've got a Sagan. They've got a Pavelski. They got a Radulov. They got a Ben. They got guys that can get the puck in the net. So if Bishop can hold them to 1 or 2 goals, they can at least get 2 goals and perhaps get it into overtime, and then it's a luck. So it's mind-boggling that they're not better offensively, but I think that's who they are right now, and to think otherwise, I think would be a mistake because they're not suddenly going to wake up and be a 3.5 goals per game team. They haven't done that over the last couple of years.
And to wrap things up this week, obviously the second biggest story of the week in hockey is the news that Sidney Crosby, whether you call it a groin injury, a sports hernia, it's been called both, but Sidney Crosby is going to be in the lineup for the next 6 weeks. And should you be jumping on a bet on Pittsburgh to miss the playoffs right now?
No, they've always done, even though mostly people think that it's Crosby that pulls the team together when Malkin is hurt. It's been the other way around as well. Both those players seem to play well, even better when their other guy isn't in. And I think Malkin will do that as well. Give this team credit. They have a winning culture. We talk about winning culture all the time. They're a great example of it. Whoever is in or out, they figure out a way to be. And I think they'll be a playoff team no matter what happens. And 6 weeks, that's a lengthy a time away from the team. But, to have him back and healthy, I think it's probably a good decision for him to take that surgery.
And we talked about this similar situation with Tarasenko missing a lot of time, but coming back fresh and ready to go, for the playoffs. And obviously Sid will be back long before the playoffs. But could that be maybe you're going to get a price now on Pittsburgh to make the playoffs with Sid out? Should you jump on that?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think, you will be fresher, less wear and tear by the time they get to the playoffs. This team has proven, everybody's predicted doom and gloom when Malkin went out, and, they came out and played very, very well. And, some of the guys that nobody was counting on have surprised us. So as long as they get the goaltending, they should be fine. And, never underestimate the Penguins. Like, I don't see them as a prime contender, but I believe they're a contender. Like, I don't think if the Pittsburgh Penguins won the cup, you could say, well, I'm surprised at that. I mean, they got Crosby and they got Malkin. They got Gunsel. They got Letang. They've got a goalie who has won a cup before. They've got Mike Sullivan behind the bench. They've got Jim Rutherford, who's one of the best horse traders in the game today. So, they have a lot of reasons to still like this team. They're just not as dominant as they've been in the past. But don't underestimate the Penguins.
People always talk about kind of the triumvirate at the top of the Atlantic in Tampa Bay, Boston, and Toronto. But it seems to me now, when you look at the Metro with what the Islanders are doing and Washington being Washington, and you've got Pittsburgh and you've got a Carolina team that looks like they're for real as well. Is the Metro now where you should be looking?
Well, I think both those divisions are pretty strong. I think you couldn't be surprised if we end up with a 4-4 split in terms of the playoff teams there, because I think both divisions have improved teams. As hard as it is to say this, because they made a nice run last year, but I think Carolina's an improved team. If you watch them play, I think they're deeper, they're stronger, they're more confident than they were a year ago. And I think the Islanders have shown they're actually a little better than they were, and they were pretty good last year as well. And in the Atlantic, I don't think we've seen Florida's best hockey, but they could be good. Certainly, Buffalo's a better team than they are. Boston is a terrific team. I don't care if they're going to lose 2 or 3 here and there, but they're really a good team. And Tampa, despite their slow start, is still they might be the most talented team in the league. So there are a lot of good teams in the East, and I think that's I think if you're looking for a sleeper, if you pull someone out of the East that you think is going to be a fourth, somewhere in there, I think that could be a good value bet as well.
All right, and that's going to wrap it up for us this week on the hockeydebates.com sports betting dime hockey betting podcast. I'm Bob Duff. I've been joined by Kevin Allen, and everybody have a great day, and I hope all your tickets that you bet are winners that you cash. And everybody enjoy the day.